I am an artist living in beautiful Vermont, USA, and I have a lot of questions. So I engage the minds of the people that I meet, poets, writers, artists. I explore what's inside and share it with you. My name is Ricky McGeckran, and I am eager to know. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Eager to Know. On today's episode, I have a friend who is a very interesting and creative individual, and I'm very excited to talk to Paris Kern. Paris, welcome to Eager to Know.
Thank you for having me, Rick.
Now, can you start by telling everyone a little bit about what you do? You are a self-employed creative person, so tell us a little bit about what you do currently.
Well, everything overlaps, but I am first and foremost a musician who then became a Feldenkrais practitioner who is now becoming more of a musician again.
Okay. And Feldenkrais is?
A type of somatic re-education. I work with individuals and groups to help them live life more easily.
Oh, who doesn't want that?
Right.
So let's go back to childhood, which is one of my favorite things to do with people. So tell me about how you started as a creative being in the world.
Well, one of the things I understand about being a creative being is that we're all creative to start with.
Okay.
We have to figure out how to roll over and crawl and walk and talk and do everything.
Okay.
Nobody teaches us those things unless, of course, we have difficulties. So I was an only child as well. And when you're an only child, you have to come up with a lot of ways to entertain yourself, which is a form of creativity.
Yeah.
And so I would create games. I would create structures, build things in the woods, build dams and lakes and things of that sort. So I just see life as a creative process.
Now, did you grow up in an area, like in a neighborhood where there were other kids, or were you like the only, literally on your own?
Pretty much. There was one little girl who lived across the road, but that was pretty much it.
Really? So you had to come up with all of this stuff. Because I did something similar. We were doing all the things that you just described, but I had a neighborhood of kids. So we were all doing all these creative, crazy things together. And
learning from each other.
Yeah, we were learning from each other. Interesting. Now, so you feel like everyone is creative. You just are, because it's a part of who you are as a, I guess, almost an organism, because even small mammals learn how to turn over on their own, which is the example that you used.
Yes, but this is the Feldenkrais brain science stuff that I'm going to get into for a moment here,
Okay.
is that human beings, we can learn to play Rachmaninoff.
Yeah.
A squirrel cannot.
Uh-huh.
Because we are a blank slate. We have to learn everything. The squirrel, it's an instinctual, low brain, responsive action.
Okay.
And they can be taught things, but to survive, they don't have to create anything.
Okay.
We have to create, each one of us, the
Okay.
ability to talk and walk and do everything. And I think creativity is something that's taught out of us and suppressed as we grow.
Meaning we are creative as youngsters. And then, yeah, I would agree with you, because if I think back at like first grade, second grade, when we have art class, there were no art stars in first grade. Everybody was confident in drawing. And then at some point, it kind of gets, people get separated, where there's like the artsy kids and then there's the math kids and that whole thing.
Right. And we're taught out of our creativity. And yes, some of us have more innate ability, perhaps, in one realm or another.
Okay.
But we all, pretty much, if we're mature adults, can do a little bit of everything, unless we suppress it.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that a lot of people, I'm a painter, and I know a lot of time, and I did a lot of training to learn how to be a painter. And I took a lot of, classes, workshops, schooling, which was almost like the military. And people will always say, oh, I can't draw a stick figure. And I'm always telling them that, well, maybe you're not going to be an incredible artist, but there is a baseline level of drawing and painting skill that really anybody can do. Mm-hmm. And I think that that level is a lot higher than people realize. Like, I think a lot of it is just practice and training.
And you probably started off when you were little drawing stick figures.
I did. I remember exactly what they looked like. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So now you as a little kid all alone, you were doing all these things in your neighborhood or in your backyard, and then when you engaged with other kids in school, tell me about how your creative, you being a creative being, how that evolved.
Well, I wouldn't say it really blossomed at all until like ninth grade, 8th or ninth grade, because as an only child, I really didn't relate to other kids really well. So I didn't have gangs of kids that I would do stuff with.
Okay.
But then all of a sudden there was, the musical in junior high school, and like I was in it and I could sing.
What was the musical?
The Mouse That Roared.
Okay. Okay. And it was a cast with singing and the whole thing.
Yep.
And had you had exposure to that type of environment?
Well, my father in particular listened to a lot of music.
Yeah.
And, once I'd gone to see The Sound of Music, I wanted to be little Julie Andrews the way everybody would. And with my one friend from across the street, we would recreate scenes from The Sounds of Music.
Okay.
We'd put on plays for the adults and things of that sort.
Sounds incredible. I wish I was your neighbor as a kid, because I totally would have loved to have seen that. When you so it sounds like you didn't have a lot of experience interacting with other kids, but when you were in this theater environment, did that change? Like
yes.
You found
Then I had my crew. I had people that I could relate to.
Yeah.
And that bled over into high school and into hanging out in the art room and being with that crew. But I was also fairly good academically up to a certain point.
Yeah. Okay. And what was that point?
Trigonometry.
So we did a pre-interview. Pardon me. And so I love this part of your story. So trigonometry and chemistry.
So I was also really into animals, as a lot of only children are. And at the age of 7, I was going to be a veterinarian.
Okay.
I was right on that path. I was going to be a veterinarian, and I still think I would have made a really good one. But I was going along academically just fine, the sciences, da-da-da-da-da. And then I hit trigonometry in 11th grade, and it was like, no. We're going to make a 180-degree turn and just capitalize on being a singer.
So what was it about trigonometry and chemistry, because you also mentioned that, what was it about those subjects that was a big scratching record sound, like we're stopping this?
I either missed something one week in 10th grade, because in biology, I got straight A's. Biology, I was like bam, 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 no problem. Either that, a really bad chemistry teacher, which could have been, because I went from straight A's to a D all of a sudden.
Interesting. All right.
Who knows? It was adolescence. What else was going on in my life? But it was just like, nope, not even going to try. It makes me feel sick inside when I try, and I don't understand it. It's no good. Hey, I can sing. I'm going to do that.
Okay. All right. And so then it became about music and singing. Mm-hmm. All right.
And I was very, very practical. I went to university, but I was in the music department, and I went to a music department in a university because I thought, well, just in case the music doesn't work out, I want to be able to switch majors at the university level. But I just stayed with it and graduated in vocal performance.
In vocal performance. So this is kind of a weird question, but how does singing and vocal performance relate to creativity? Because when you're performing, I'm assuming you're performing something that somebody else has already written, and you are performing it. How did they relate?
I was always drawn not to the classical world, which I was trained in, but into the traditional folk world. And when you're doing traditional folk tunes, you do them in your own way. You arrange them in your own way while staying true to the form of the song. So I'm talking about folk songs, not Broadway, not pop, the stuff that Joan Baez used to do.
Okay.
The stuff that Bob Dylan started with and then stole a lot from.
Okay.
That's what I mean by traditional folk music.
And when you're performing that kind of music, you're saying that you take the sort of the foundations of it and then you make it your own, and that's how it's generally performed?
For me.
For you, okay.
For me. Some people stay the way these traditional Appalachian tunes were recorded in the 20s by people who collected those songs back in the 1920s and 30s. I always prefer to adapt it a little bit, change it a little bit. But then I stopped playing music for a long time after my son was born for other reasons, and I went into the whole somatic re-education world, which was also created because the way I was trained with Feldenkrais is not, we have a recipe. If somebody comes to me with a frozen shoulder, there's not a frozen shoulder formula. You have to figure out why this individual in this life, with their patterns of movement and behavior and thinking and lifestyle, how did they create this frozen shoulder?
So let's talk a little bit more in detail about Feldenkrais and what that is and the somatic. Just tell people who have no idea what you're talking about, what you're talking about and what you're doing and what someone would need that they would work with you in this regard.
Well, I can work with anybody with a brain stem. Okay, if you're alive, I can work with you, even if you're a quadriplegic and you're never going to get out of the bed.
Okay.
I can work with how do you breathe more easily? How are your eyes moving? How is your tongue moving? Or I can work with high-performing musicians, as I did last summer at a music festival, people who are at the top of the game and having all sorts of aches and pains because they're playing, rehearsing for 8 hours a day and they can't figure out why they can't play better. And I go, well, your shoulder rest needs to be a 1/4 inch higher. And they put the 1/4 inch there, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's so easy to play now.
So this is something that is related to music, or is it just about
function, any human function?
Okay.
So if you need to learn, if you've had a stroke and you need to learn how to roll over in bed, a Feldenkrais practitioner can look and see what parts of you have not been affected by the stroke and say, okay, this is what you can do. This is how you can only use one side of your body, if you only have that, to figure out how to shift your weight to roll over.
And how did you get into this?
Pain. Because I was playing a lot of music and having a lot of pain. I thought it was related to the guitar, but for me, what it was related to was using my arms and neck very strongly with no support from my back and my pelvis. Okay. So it was a process of becoming better through studying Feldenkrais as a patient myself, and then finding out about a training, and then just going, it was the first thing that had excited me as much as music.
Really?
Because again, you have to use your brain. You're thinking in terms of a system, which takes a certain kind of discipline in the brain, not to just think in terms of body parts, but how is everything interconnected all the time? Because that is what the reality is your brain is constantly talking to all the parts of your body, okay. All the systems.
And someone out there that is watching this and listening to us, what would, if someone was experiencing what, that your Feldenkrais would be something that they would want to look at?
Well, if it's a high-level performing person, somebody who's basically very healthy, and they can't figure out why when they want to lift the weight with the right arm, it's so easy, and why they want to lift the weight with the left arm, something hurts. Mm-hmm. I can look at them and say, oh, because you're not letting the spine move over there when you lift the arm.
Okay.
Here's a little example everybody can try at home. Just interlace your fingers. Yeah, right? You didn't have to think about how to do that. But you weren't born knowing how to do this. This is a fairly sophisticated thing that you need to be 3 or 4 years old. 3 or 4 years old of doing nothing but figuring things out. Okay. Right? Now look which thumb is on top of your thumbs, right?
Yeah.
Move everything over one notch.
I know, my yoga teacher has us do this. Look, I can't even, look at that. I messed up.
You messed up. But if you go back and forth 3 or 4 times, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can do it.
Yeah.
But if you only cross your arms like this and you never cross your arms like that, and you always have a problem on one side of your back, you're using yourself asymmetrically. Yeah. So, and this, even doing this is like, this is more about leaning on the left hip. This is more about leaning on the right hip. So all these different things come into play when somebody comes and says, I just can't get rid of this pain in my elbow. Or, I've been constipated for years. I can't figure out why. So, well, maybe if you stopped holding your tummy in all the time, you wouldn't be constipated. So there's really nothing that we can't touch, because what we're looking at is basic human functions, which underlie all of our activities.
Okay. All right. Can we talk about circle singing?
Well, that's the main heart of my life right now.
All right, then we are definitely going to talk about it. So what do you want me to know and everyone to know about circle singing?
You had asked before about the creative aspect involved with the kind of music I used to do. And the idea of doing something improvisationally, completely without rehearsal, without plan, without anything, would have sent me running in the opposite direction.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare.
And then I met Bobby McFerrin.
Okay. Don't worry, be happy.
Yes, but if that's all you know
That's
about
all
him,
I know.
You have to look. That's like a grain of sand of a Miami Beach of who he is.
Okay.
He's just an amazing human being and an incredibly accomplished. He's the top of the top of the top.
Okay.
He's way up there. And I went to a workshop with him in 2011 that I can only say I was divinely inspired or compelled to go, because I'm like, well, he's a jazz singer. I'm not a jazz singer. Why would I go? And in circle singing, what actually happens is you will have a facilitator or a leader stand in the middle of a circle of people. 12 is kind of the minimum that you want, but it can be up to 100. It can be 1,000, as Bobby has done. And you come up with a part. And some people who are musicians out there might know what a looper is. It's a machine that makes you play into it, and then it just keeps repeating the same phrase. So this is like having a human loop machine. So I would give one part like boom, da-da, 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 and that would keep going on. And then that section would keep doing that. And I'd add another part, maybe it's a harmony, boom, da-da, boom, da-da, da-da. And then maybe I'd add another part and another part, and then you have this whole thing happening. And the first time I actually got skilled enough to lead a circle, and this was with 100 people, and Bobby McFerrin there, when you've always just been a solo singer, you're always hearing harmonies in your head, but you can't sing your own harmonies. It just doesn't happen. But when you create like this, and then you have this thing that you've just created out of thin air, based on a lot of skills, like the painting, for me, and I almost get tears in my eyes, it was like having my heart sung back to me. It was like all the harmony I'd ever heard in my head, they were singing it for me. And circle singing is something that's, Bobby likes to say that he rediscovered, or not even reinvented, but unearthed the way humans used to sing. Because in the beginning, there were no instruments. So somebody probably started doing something,
Like
and
that,
then
yeah.
and then somebody said, "Oh, I want to do that too. Oh, I'm going to do this. Ooh, that sounds good with this."
Yeah.
And in all societies, there is singing.
Yeah.
And I like to say with the students that I work with, or the people that I sing with, is that singing is a birthright. It's a human right. And in today's society, there is a hunger for it that you see cropping up, especially in a millennial and below generations, which many of them didn't grow up with a common songbook from the school.
How are you seeing it crop? You say that it's cropping
Well,
up. In what way? How do you see
So
that?
I just got done teaching at a festival in Massachusetts. And the majority of people at the festival were between 20 and 35. And I would say the vast majority between 20 and 30. And they were there to learn to do these song circles, which is a different thing than circle singing, but they wanted to sing. And you see these things cropping up all over. And the song circle people, they create these little mantra-like songs, like 2 or 3 phrases that are repeated over, and then they're layered and harmonized. And while I was watching them do this, I was like listening to the words, and at first I thought, oh, this is so shallow, so naive. La, 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 la. We all love each other. Let the universe in. Love your, But then when I really listened to all the different things they were singing, they were prayers. They were prayers of grief, of thanksgiving, of thankfulness for community, for all the things, the classical prayers that previous generations knew from church. But this generation didn't grow up with either a common songbook in the schools. They didn't grow up with a common songbook in the schools or a common songbook in church. And it doesn't matter if they believed what they were singing. And the act of singing together, and lots of scientific studies show that when we sing together, our breathing regulates together, our hearts start to beat together, we feel like we're part of something greater than ourselves. And you can be the biggest atheist in the world, and one of the people in my ensemble is a very big guy, and he's also an atheist. This is his church. Right. Singing is his church.
So someone watching this or listening to this, what would they be wanting in their life that you think circle singing would be a way to get that?
Community.
Community. If someone's looking for community.
Because it's open for everyone. You know, if all you can do is t, 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 you're welcome to come.
Okay.
And if you can't even do that in time, it doesn't matter, because there's enough strong musicians or singers in the group that lift you up.
Okay.
There was a saying going back to Feldenkrais that Moshe used to talk about, is that if you're like a so-so dancer, but then you partner up with somebody who's a really good dancer, all of a sudden you feel like you're a good dancer.
Yeah.
And you are a better dancer.
You are, yeah.
And the same thing is true for singing.
Right. Okay, great. Now, you had mentioned that we are creative, all of us instinctively creative. What would you say to someone who is watching this or listening to this and they don't think they're creative at all? Like they're living a life that they feel is not creative. What would you tell them about them being a creative individual, and why it's important to know that?
Right now, I didn't know beforehand how I was going to answer your question. Having a conversation with a person is an act of creativity. I'm responding to a stimulus from outside myself, which is your question. But as I'm talking, I don't know what's going to happen next. Mm-hmm. That's a creative act. If you can talk, you're already being creative. If you can think, I think I'm going to add some curry powder to my scrambled eggs. That's a creative act.
I completely agree, especially about the talking part. So now, why do you think it's important for people to be aware of that? Or is it important to be aware that you are a creative being?
I don't think it's important to be aware of it unless you're unhappy with the status quo, because there are, creative people in societies, and have been for tens of thousands of years, who didn't think of themselves as creative. They just lived life, and they were happy and content. But there's a joy in, maybe it's a little, I don't know if I would even say it's selfish, but an ownership of something. It's like, oh, look what I just did. Isn't that fun? I mean,
look what I just put into the universe. That
exactly.
wasn't there an hour ago.
And what is it what makes joy in your life? Being a creative is not the best way to make money. So there's got to be something else that people get from it, right? You want to be wealthy, except for the few Beyoncés and Taylors out there. As a fine artist, most fine artists never get money until they're dead. And musicians, forget about it. Chefs, the same thing with chefs. There's a few wealthy chefs, and then there's a bazillion brilliant chefs who will never get wealthy. So why do people do it if it's not going to keep a roof over their head necessarily? So why be creative? You don't know what you're missing if you haven't tried.
Okay. All right, great. Is there anything else that you think people should know about you and what you're doing and all the wonderful things that you're putting out in the world?
No, but I would just say, just Google circle singing and your state or your town, and you may find a group that you will be very welcome to join.
Okay.
Or if you've never put curry in your scrambled eggs, try that.
All right. Well, thank you. That is great advice. I'm going to be putting curry in my. I will go to circle singing, and I'm going to do both, and I'm going to do the curry.
And a little garlic.
All right. Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. This was really great.
I really had fun.
All right. Good.
Thank you.
My name is Ricky McGuckran, and you have been listening to Eager to Know, the podcast. If you haven't already, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join me next week for another Eager to Know podcast.